In 40 years of practicing law, I have seen the face of grief and I have seen the face of greed. But nothing prepared me for that Tuesday afternoon in my conference room. Mrs. Eleanor's 3 children sat across from me, checking their expensive watches, already spending millions in their heads. They didn't shed a tear. They just wanted the signature. They thought this meeting was a mere formality to access their bank accounts. They were wrong. When I turned the page and read the final clause, Clause 19, the smile vanished from their faces instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, cold, and terrifying. It wasn't just a denial of funds. It was a mirror they were forced to look into. But to understand why they walked out of my office trembling, I need to go back to the day Mrs. Eleanor called me for the last time. Before I take you back to that cold Tuesday morning, I'm curious, where are you listening to this story from? Is it morning or night in your city? Let me know in the comments below. I always like to know how far these stories travel. Now, to understand the shock on Robert, Claire, and David's faces, you have to understand who Eleanor was, or rather, who she had become in those final years. Eleanor Vanderbilt was not just a wealthy woman, she was an institution in our town. Her husband, rest his soul, had built a shipping empire that left her with assets worth over $50 million. But money, as I've learned, is a poor conversationalist. It doesn't hug you back. It doesn't ask how you slept. For the last 5 years, Eleanor lived in a mansion that was far too big for one person. It was a beautiful place, filled with antique mahogany furniture, Persian rugs, and crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon light. But it was silent. A deafening, heavy silence that pressed against your eardrums. I used to visit her once a month, not just as her lawyer, but because I knew no one else did. I would drive up the long gravel driveway, park my modest sedan next to her empty garage, and find her sitting in the sunroom staring out at the garden. The garden was impeccable, roses, hydrangeas, manicured hedges, but she wasn't looking at the flowers. She was looking at the driveway, waiting for a car that never came. "Did Robert call?" I would ask gently, pouring her a cup of tea. She would smile, that polite, heartbreaking smile of a mother covering for her children. "Oh, Arthur, you know Robert. He's so busy with the firm in New York. He sent flowers for my birthday last month." He hadn't. I knew for a fact his secretary had sent them. Robert probably didn't even know what kind of flowers they were. Then there was Claire. Claire, who was always finding herself in Italy or Bali, usually on Eleanor's dime. And David, the youngest, who only called when his gambling debts or failed investments needed a quiet rescue. They weren't evil people in the criminal sense. They were worse. They were indifferent. They treated their mother like a bank vault, essential to maintain, but boring to visit. I remember one Christmas Eve 2 years ago. I stopped by to drop off some documents. The house was decorated like something out of a magazine. Lights, a 12-foot tree, garlands on every railing. But the house was empty. Just Eleanor and the hired staff. "Where are they?" I asked, unable to hide my anger. "Robert is skiing in Aspen," she said softly, touching a silver ornament on the tree. "Claire is in the Maldives. And David, well, he said the flight was too complicated." She looked at me, her eyes watery but refusing to spill a tear. "It's okay, Arthur. They have their own lives. I'm just an old woman slowing them down." That sentence broke something inside me, but it also broke something inside her. I didn't know it then, but that Christmas was the turning point. That was the moment the sadness began to harden into something else, something colder, something like resolve. 3 months ago, the dynamic changed. It was a stormy afternoon. The rain was hammering against the windows of my office when my private line rang. It was Eleanor. Usually her voice was soft, almost apologetic for disturbing me, but this time she sounded sharp, lucid. "Arthur, I need you to come over. Today. Bring the file, the entire file." "Is everything all right, Eleanor?" "No," she replied. "Everything is finally clear. Just come." When I arrived at the mansion, the atmosphere was different. The house usually felt stagnant, like a museum. But today, there was energy. Eleanor was sitting at the dining table, which was covered in old photo albums and ledgers, but she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was a woman I vaguely recognized. She was wearing a simple, worn-out wool cardigan and had messy hair. She looked tired, but her hands were holding Eleanor's hands. This was Sarah. She was the neighbor from the small cottage down the road, a nurse who worked double shifts at the city hospital. "Arthur, sit down," Eleanor commanded. She didn't offer tea this time. She pushed a blue velvet notebook toward me. It wasn't a legal document, it was a journal. "I've been reading through my life, Arthur," she said, tapping the book. "And I realized I've been investing in the wrong stocks." I was confused. "The portfolio is performing well, Eleanor. The bonds are—" "Not that stock," she interrupted, her eyes flashing with a fire I hadn't seen in decades. "I'm talking about people, my children. They wait for me to die like investors wait for a market bell. They calculate my heartbeat in dollars." She looked at Sarah, and her expression softened instantly. "Sarah has been coming here every day for 2 years, Arthur. Did you know that? She comes after her shift. She reads to me. She rubs my feet when the arthritis flares up. She makes me soup. Last week, when I fell in the bathroom, Sarah found me. Not Robert, not my children." I looked at Sarah. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I didn't do it for anything, Mr. Arthur. She's my friend." Eleanor squeezed Sarah's hand and then looked me dead in the eye. "I want to change the will, Arthur." I opened my briefcase. "Okay, we can adjust the percentages. Maybe set up a trust for the grandchildren?" "No," Eleanor said. Her voice was ice. "I want to rewrite the entire distribution clause. I want to add a condition, a test." "A test?" I put my pen down. "Eleanor, testamentary conditions can be tricky. If they contest it in court, let them contest it," she said. "If they fail this test, they get the statutory minimum, nothing more. The rest goes to the backup beneficiary." She handed me a handwritten sheet of paper. As I read her instructions, my eyes widened. It was unconventional, it was risky, it was brilliant. "Eleanor," I warned her, "this will cause a war. They will tear this house apart." She leaned back, looking smaller than ever, yet infinitely stronger. "They already tore my heart apart, Arthur. Now I'm just balancing the books. Draft it." That was the last time I saw her alive. She passed away in her sleep 2 weeks later. Sarah was the one holding her hand when she took her last breath. Her children were, of course, unreachable. The funeral was a theatrical performance worthy of an Oscar. Robert gave a eulogy about the guiding light of our family, wiping away a tear that didn't exist. Claire wore a black designer dress that probably cost more than Sarah's car, sobbing loudly whenever anyone looked in her direction. David stood by the grave, checking his phone every 30 seconds. I stood in the back, watching the hypocrisy. It made my stomach turn. I clutched my briefcase tighter, knowing what was inside. The bomb. 3 days later, they arrived at my office for the reading of the will. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't the tension of grief. It was the tension of hunger. They were like sharks smelling blood in the water. They sat on one side of the long oak conference table. Robert took the head seat naturally. "Let's make this quick, Arthur," Robert said, drumming his fingers on the table. "I have a flight to London tonight. We know the drill, 3-way split, the house goes to the market, liquefy the assets, standard." "Actually," I said, remaining standing, "it's not standard." The door opened, and my secretary ushered Sarah in. She looked terrified. She was wearing a simple black dress, clutching her purse like a shield. "Who is this?" Claire asked, looking at Sarah with pure disdain. "The cleaning lady." "This is Sarah," I said firmly. "She is a named party in the proceedings. She stays." "This is a private family matter," David snapped. "Get her out." She stays, I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, or the reading does not happen. Robert sighed, rolling his eyes. Fine, let the help sit in the corner, just get on with it. How much is the total? $55 million, I stated. The air left the room. They exchanged glances. Greed lit up their eyes like fireworks. For a second, they forgot they hated each other. 55 million meant they were all free. Excellent, Robert said, leaning back. Read the distribution. I put on my glasses. I opened the thick leather folder. I saw Eleanor's signature at the bottom of the page. I looked up at them one last time. They looked so confident, so assured of their birthright. To my children, Robert, Claire, and David, I began reading. I leave my love, which I hope you felt, even if you rarely returned it. Claire scoffed audibly. Regarding my financial assets, I continued, I have structured the inheritance under a specific conditional clause. Clause 19. Conditional? Robert sat up straight. What condition? Mother was senile. We can contest. She was of sound mind, Robert. I cut him off. And everything is recorded on video. Now, do you want to hear the condition, or do you want to forfeit your claim right now? Silence. Good, I said. Clause 19 states, the entire estate of $55 million will be distributed immediately to my 3 children, to be shared equally, provided they can answer one single question. David laughed nervously. A quiz? Is this a joke? Mom and her games. If you cannot answer the question correctly, I read on, ignoring him, the entire estate will be transferred to the backup beneficiary named in the sealed envelope on this table. I placed a thick, cream-colored envelope in the center of the table. Robert stared at it. Okay, fine. What's the question? What was her maiden name? Where was she born? Just ask it. I looked at them. Then I looked at Sarah, who was trembling in the corner. It is not a question about the past, I said. It is a question about the present. I turned the page. That's when the truth started to surface. The room was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming, a low drone that sounded like a countdown. I looked at the 3 of them. Robert, the successful CEO, sweating through his expensive suit. Claire, the socialite, picking at her fingernails. David, the gambler, staring at the envelope as if he could burn a hole through it with his eyes. The question, I repeated, holding the document up, is simple. Your mother didn't want to test your knowledge of history or trivia. She wanted to test your presence. I cleared my throat and read the question aloud. In the last 2 years of my life, I have had dinner with one person every single night. This person cooked for me, ate with me, and listened to me when I was too weak to speak loud. What is the full name of this person? I lowered the paper. You have 60 seconds to answer. Robert scoffed, a sound of pure disbelief. That's it? That's the $55 million question? Who she ate dinner with? Yes, I said. Start. Well, it's obviously the chef, Claire said, rolling her eyes. What was his name? Pierre? Jean-Luc? We hired that agency 3 years ago. We fired the agency, Claire, Robert snapped. Mom said they were too expensive. It was probably the housekeeper. Maria? No, Marta. It wasn't Marta, David interrupted, his voice shaking. Marta died last year. Mom told me, I think she told me. So who was it? Robert looked at me, his face turning red. This is ridiculous, Arthur. She lived alone. She had staff. Just tell us the name of the employee so we can sign the papers. 30 seconds, I said, checking my watch. Panic started to set in. Real panic. Think, Robert yelled at his siblings. Who was there? Did anyone visit her? I don't know, Claire shrieked. I live in Milan, Robert. You live in the city. You were supposed to check on her. Me? Robert slammed his hand on the table. I pay the bills. I paid for the maintenance of this house. I didn't have time to sit around eating soup. 10 seconds, I announced. They started shouting random names. The driver, her sister, Aunt May, the gardener. Time's up, I said softly. The silence returned. Heavier this time. Suffocating. So, Robert demanded, breathless, who was it? Who is the mystery dinner guest? I didn't say a word. I simply turned my head and looked toward the corner of the room. Sarah was sitting there, tears streaming down her face, her hands clutching a tissue. "No," Claire whispered, looking at the nurse. "No way." "The answer," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade, "is Sarah Jenkins." "The help?" Robert laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. "You're telling me my mother left $55 million to the help because she ate dinner with her?" "Sarah wasn't the help, Robert," I corrected him, feeling a surge of protective anger. "Sarah was the only person who treated your mother like a human being. Sarah wasn't paid to be here at dinner time. Her shift ended at 5. She stayed because she didn't want Eleanor to eat alone in this mausoleum of a house." I picked up the sealed envelope, the backup beneficiary file. "Since you failed to answer the question," I declared formally, "Clause 19 is activated. The primary beneficiaries, Robert, Claire, and David, are hereby removed from the estate." "You can't do that!" David jumped up, knocking his chair over. "This is fraud! She manipulated her. Look at her, she's crying fake tears." He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. Sarah shrank back into the chair. "Sit down, David," I warned, "or I will have security remove you. I'm not finished." What else is there?" Claire sobbed, finally realizing the money she had probably already spent in her mind, was gone. "She took it all. The stranger took it all." "There is a letter," I said. "Eleanor wrote a letter specifically for this moment. She said to read it only if you failed the test." I opened the second envelope. The handwriting was shaky, written in the final days of her illness. But the worst part came later. I held the letter with both hands. I felt the weight of Eleanor's grief in the paper. "To my children," I began reading. The room was frozen. Even David stopped breathing. "If Arthur is reading this to you, it means you didn't know who Sarah was. And if you didn't know Sarah, you didn't know me. For a long time I made excuses for you. I told myself you were busy. I told myself you were building your empires, finding yourselves. But then I got sick. Really sick. And in the silence of my bedroom, I realized something painful. I wasn't your mother anymore. I was your ATM. Do you remember when you were little, Robert? You used to cry when I left the room. Now you don't even know if I'm in the room. Claire, you used to show me your drawings. Now you only show me invoices. David, you used to ask me to check under your bed for monsters. You became the monster you were afraid of. I didn't leave my money to Sarah because I love her more than you. I loved you with every fiber of my being. I left it to her because she was the only one who saw me. She saw the fear in my eyes when the doctor gave me the diagnosis. You didn't see it because you weren't here. She held the bucket when the chemotherapy made me sick. You weren't here. The money is not a punishment. It is a mirror. If you had known who cooked my dinner, you would have known my life. You would have earned the inheritance not by blood, but by love. I hope this money brings Sarah the peace she gave me, and I hope the lack of it brings you the wisdom you desperately need. I love you. I always have. But love is a verb, and you forgot how to conjugate it. Goodbye, Mom. I finished reading. I placed the letter gently on the table. For a long minute, nobody moved. The devastation in the room was absolute. It wasn't just about the money anymore. The words had stripped them naked. Robert slumped in his chair, putting his head in his hands. The arrogant CEO was gone. In his place was a little boy who realized he had missed the boat. Claire was weeping openly now, not the fake theatrical sobs from the funeral, but ugly, gasping tears of regret. Even David looked broken, staring at the floor as if the abyss was staring back. If you are listening to this, and you have someone waiting for your call, a mother, a father, a grandparent, don't wait. Don't let a lawyer read a letter like this to you. Some silences can never be fixed. If you've ever felt this kind of regret, or if you refuse to let it happen to you, you're not alone. Back in the office, the silence was broken by a soft sound. It was Sarah. She stood up. She walked over to the table. She didn't look at the check. She didn't look at the documents transferring the mansion to her name. She looked at Robert, Claire, and David. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn-out velvet pouch. "I don't want it," Sarah whispered. My head snapped up. "Excuse me, I don't want the money," Sarah repeated, her voice trembling but firm. "I didn't do it for the money. Eleanor knew that. She knew I wouldn't take it." "Sarah," I said, "this is $55 million. It's legally yours." "I know," she said. She placed the velvet pouch on the table in front of Robert. "But she gave me something else, something she wanted you to have, but she was too proud to give it to you herself unless you learned the lesson." Robert looked at the pouch. He looked at Sarah. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Then came the moment I will never forget. Robert's hand trembled as he reached for the velvet pouch. He opened it slowly. He tipped it over, and a small, rusted iron key fell onto the polished mahogany table with a heavy clink. "A key?" Claire asked, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks. "To a safe? Is the money in cash?" Sarah shook her head. A sad, compassionate smile touched her lips. "No," Sarah said softly. "It's the key to the attic." "The attic?" David frowned. "What's in the attic?" "Everything she actually valued," Sarah replied, "and the answer to where the money went." I stepped forward. I knew this part of the will, but I hadn't expected Sarah to trigger it so gracefully. "Sarah is right," I announced. "Eleanor anticipated this exact moment. She knew her children, and she knew Sarah. She knew that if you failed the test, the money would go to Sarah. But she also predicted that Sarah, being the woman she is, would try to give it back to you." I pulled out one final document. "This is Clause 20, I said. "It states, if the backup beneficiary, Sarah, refuses the inheritance or attempts to return it to my children, the assets are to be immediately liquefied and donated in full to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital." The color drained from Robert's face completely. "You mean it's gone? All of it?" "Every cent," I confirmed. "The transfer happens automatically upon Sarah's refusal. The money is gone, but—" I pointed to the key. "She left you the house and the contents of the attic." Sarah placed her hand on Robert's shoulder. He didn't pull away this time. "She spent the last month of her life in that attic," Sarah whispered, "organizing things. She said, if they come for the money, they will leave with nothing. If they come for me, they will find treasure." Robert stood up. He grabbed the key. Without saying a word, he walked out of the conference room, his siblings trailing behind him like ghosts. Sarah and I followed. We drove to the mansion in a convoy of silence. When we arrived, the house loomed large and grey against the sky. Robert unlocked the front door, and we climbed the stairs to the attic. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old paper. When Robert turned the key and pushed the attic door open, they stopped. It wasn't filled with gold bars. It was filled with boxes, hundreds of them, and on every box there was a date and a name. Robert, 1985. Claire, first recital. David, baseball season. Robert walked to a box labeled Robert, science fair. He opened it. Inside was his blue ribbon from 4th grade, a drawing he had made of a rocket ship, and a note written in Eleanor's handwriting, "My little astronaut. You will reach the stars one day. Just don't forget the Earth." Claire opened a box. It was full of the letters she had sent from camp, every single postcard, every single drawing. David found a box with his old glove. Inside the glove was a photo of him and Eleanor laughing in this very garden. They fell to their knees. Surrounded by millions of dollars worth of memories, they finally realized what they had lost. They hadn't lost $55 million. They had lost the only person who treated these dusty objects like treasure. And in the middle of the room, on an old wooden chair, sat a video camera. "Play it," Robert whispered. I pressed play. The small screen flickered to life. It was Eleanor. She looked frail, pale, but her eyes were bright. "If you are watching this," the video, Eleanor said, "it means the money is gone. Good. It was poisoning us. It was a wall between my heart and yours. Now the wall is down. This house is yours, but you can't sell it. The deed is in a trust. You can only keep it if you use it for family holidays. If you gather here together, that is my real inheritance. I don't want you to be rich. I want you to be siblings again. I want you to be a family." Robert sat on the dusty floor of the attic and wept. Not the polite crying of a funeral, but the ugly, deep sobbing of a man whose soul has cracked open. Claire held him. David held both of them. For the first time in 20 years, they were touching each other. They were holding on for dear life. Sarah stood in the doorway watching them. She had given up $55 million to make this moment happen, and looking at her face, I knew she didn't regret a single penny. But this story didn't end there. 6 months later, I drove past the mansion. It wasn't empty anymore. There were cars in the driveway. There was a bicycle on the lawn. I heard they didn't sell the house. They couldn't. The trust I set up was ironclad. Robert scaled back his work at the firm. Claire moved back from Italy. David started therapy. They meet there every Sunday for dinner. And guess who cooks? No, not a chef. They cook together. And at the head of the table there is always an empty chair with a fresh rose from the garden for Eleanor. And next to it, a seat for Sarah, who is now the honorary aunt of the family. They lost a fortune, but they found something money can't buy. They found each other. Stories like this exist because someone lived them, and someone listened. We often chase the inheritance of gold, forgetting the inheritance of time. If this story made you think of someone you haven't called in a while, do it today. Don't wait for the reading of the will. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, and if you want to support more truths like this, you are always welcome here. See you in the next story.